Okay, guys, welcome to another episode of Behind the Podcast, the show where we talk to your favorite podcasters, get to know them just a little bit more. I'm your host, Adamo Barbieri. We are on getvocal.com, but we are also live on Facebook, YouTube, Periscope. Thank you so much for joining us. But if you're watching on those platforms, get on getvocal.com, even get the app. It's so much fun. You can become a part of the interview if you like. Get in the chat here, write any questions you like, even grab a spot face-to-face with our podcasters today and ask any questions you'd like. We're all open. We're open books here. We just want to get to know each other a little bit more and dig a little deep. Today, we're talking all about comic books, and our guests are Mike Rapin from I Read Comic Books podcast and Eric from the Long Box Review podcast. Guys, grab a spot, get on in here, and let's get started.
What's going on, man?
Hello. How are you? Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh man, I'm super pumped to be here. Really excited to be here. Eric is a very nice guy. Really.
Do you guys know each other?
No. I just been listening to his show for a little bit. That's all.
There you go.
Same. So this is really great.
A little friendly competition.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Okay, guys. Well, let's get right into it. Why do you read comic books? What is it about comic books that keeps you going back?
Eric, I'll let you start.
I guess this is age before beauty.
Yes. Respect the elders.
Well, I've been reading comic books now. I think around about 41 years now, straight since 1978 or so. What keeps me coming back to them? They're just the most entertaining thing that's being produced. Even more so than television, movies. Live entertainment, music. It's the kind of entertainment that delivers a lot of different kinds of styles and different interpretations of various characters. I'm thinking of the superhero genre, but throughout all the years, you get so many different ways of interpreting Superman and Spider-Man, etc. And then you get the wonderful indie comic stuff that with these wonderful creators who provide such varied and wonderful entertainment through their imaginations. So it's just really a journey of discovery for me, just trying to find the best kind of stories out there.
I mean,
how about you, Mike?
That's exactly it. No, comic books. Comic books are definitely one of the most important mediums. Some have said on my show that it is the most important, the best medium for storytelling. I really can't disagree. The more I read comics, like I've been reading comics for 15-ish years. The more comics I read, the more comics I dive into and find just through, going to indie comic conventions or going to the big comic conventions, just happen to stumble over a lot of stuff. Like it's proof that there's a comic book for everyone about almost anything. I mean, you can from war comics to sci-fi to, slice of life comics. I mean, you get your super action packed anime, manga stuff. I mean, there are comic books about everything, and the thing that keeps me most excited about it is that there's always more. There's always going to be more new interesting things, and yeah, that's pretty much what keeps me going. I guess that's why I read them. There's always going to be more. There's always going to be more interesting stuff.
Yeah. So Eric, you brought up definitely well said. Eric, you brought up the different generation, age before beauty, as you said. As you progressed and got older, did you change the type of comics that you read? And do you still read ones that you read when you were younger? How does that work? And do you it's not, this is a poor example, but classic rock, my dad is just they don't make it like they used to. You know what I mean? Does that apply with comic books?
Sometimes maybe a little bit, but really it's for me when I started out, much like many of my peers, we probably started out reading DC Comics and Marvel Comics, right? Because those were the ones that we knew about. Those are the ones that were on the shelves, the spinner racks, the actual old time spinner racks. I know spinner racks are making a comeback in terms of people producing them and putting them in their homes, but I actually had to go to the stores to find these comics on spinner racks. And so, yeah, I started with superheroes, as I think a lot of us do. But then as I got older, my taste started to change. I got more mature, and I wanted to read things that were, more than your typical superhero slugfest. And I'm really dumbing it down, because there are some really great superhero comics out there, really great superhero stories.
Yeah.
But that led me to more of the independence, like I mentioned earlier, and just trying to discover new and interesting ways of telling various kinds of stories.
Okay. So going back to being younger and reading comic books, obviously there's that stereotype of a nerd. You know what I mean? But I feel like that idea and that concept of nerd has evolved immensely from 40 years ago to now, because back then nerd was actually kind of negative, and bullies would come at you, and you read a comic book and stuff like that. And now it's kind of these bullies or jocks, or whatever, they're kind of into this culture as well too. So what are your thoughts on that whole stereotype and the evolution of that? Mike, or Mike?
I mean, my thought is nowadays you can't find someone who's not into some sort of super heroic thing, or they watched Power Rangers, they were into some anime. I bless the executives over at Cartoon Network who decided that we should put Dragon Ball Z on at 4 p.m. in the afternoon, because I think that really changed the way that people saw cartoons. And then people realize, Dragon Ball Z is one example. Sailor Moon is another perfect example of that. But still, putting these types of shows on, and then folks realizing, there's more to this that I can get. I can read these manga, and then but if you like this one, if you might like this thing. So people that read Dragon Ball Z may be into Bleach or something like that, or maybe you watched Mighty Morphin Power Rangers as a kid, and now there's a whole line of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers comics that you can read. I think that that idea that you're talking about is something that was probably pretty pervasive in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and I mean, I wasn't alive back then. But I think that has really died out, and now we're starting to see that there is this overwhelming culture of people that like this quote unquote stereotypically nerdy stuff, and instead it's become pop culture in general. The Marvel movies have changed the way that we think about all of this type of stuff, and because of that, now it's not so strange to see some random person on the subway or at a park reading a comic book. I say that I live in New York City, so I'm on the subway seeing people reading Spider-Man, and I'm like, this is the future that I want. People out in public reading comics and celebrating it, not being ashamed, because it could be an elderly 60-year-old woman, or it could be an 8-year-old little boy. It doesn't matter. People are reading comic books, and that's what's important.
Eric, can you speak to, people who are on the outside of this culture, looking in, don't really understand it, can maybe associate reading comic books for people of a certain age, and when you get past a certain age, maybe late teens or something, they might judge you. But now, that shouldn't be the case whatsoever. But how do you feel about that negative association with reading comic books throughout your life? Because people don't see it as reading a book, right? They see it, picture book, or I don't know. You know what I mean?
Well, I think that attitude hasn't quite gone away totally, but I agree with Mike that, we've had a transformative event over the last 10 years. And Mike very, very accurately put the blame or the just put it on the feet of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yeah.
I think that's what really allowed the public at large to accept nerd culture. The rise of Comic-Cons, I'll add that in as another avenue that helped transform that attitude. But yeah, it's speaking as someone who did grow up in the early 80s reading comic books, that was something that I did not tell other people that weren't my brethren who were also reading comic books, because that was literally, we could get beat up by a bully who thought we were, nerds, right? Fast forward now, 35, 40 years later, and to see where we're at today is just, I am flabbergasted, quite honestly, how things have changed so much, and I'm not sure quite how to express that feeling. I guess the certain amount of acceptance there is across people of all ages and viewpoints, to the point where we're at now, where we have 2 or 3 Marvel movies a year, and I know DC's trying to do their thing with it, but and just the plethora of what's on television too, that relates to nerd culture, superhero shows, and anything adjacent to that. It's just astounding.
Yeah.
Now, you were talking about expressing your passion. I mean, we're going to get into movies and TV shows very soon, but I want to talk about the moment that you guys decided that you needed to start a podcast. Like you're so passionate about comic books. Like, do you remember that defining moment where you're like, let's get this going, let's get a podcast started? And why did it come down to a podcast over anything else? Mike, you can start.
Okay. So my story is very long. If only because I've been when I started reading comic books, I got very, very, very into it, like very fast. Okay. I got basically the turning point was I started reading The Walking Dead right after it first started. Robert Kirkman also had another book called Invincible that was running, and I started reading Ultimate Spider-Man, which is like Brian Michael Bendis. He's also the creator of like Miles Morales, who was later became Ultimate Spider-Man. I got really into that kind of stuff, to the point where I was talking so much with people about it and reading so much about it. I was like, hey, I should start a website. I started this website called destroythecyborg.org. Destroy the Cyborg, because I thought that was a really clever little domain. And
I like it.
It's still out there. Well, it's out there. It redirects to my current podcast now, but still, I ran that site for like 7 years. Like, I was 19 years old and I started this site. I had like 30 people. By the end of it, I had about 30 people writing on the site with me. And we kind of lost momentum. I started doing the podcast as part of that site. And, a year and a half later, I shut down the site, basically dedicated myself full time to the podcast. And it's been 4.5 years. And we just passed 200 episodes, like official episodes this past year, and then 250 total episodes with bonus episodes and minisodes and stuff. It's just been like a thing I want to do all the time. I love talking to people about comic books. I say on the show, I don't like talking to people about comic books, but I genuinely enjoy having like a good conversation with people about comics and discovering why they really like Superman because I'm not a big fan, or why someone really likes, is really into Green Lantern because I'm more of a Marvel person. What gets you into that? Hearing someone's passion totally gets me to buy a Green Lantern book to read it, because if they like it that much, there's got to be a good reason. Maybe I just misjudged it. And so like the podcast for me has been trying to inform myself about what makes comics good, how we can make comics better, how to support comics that are good in order to continue that momentum, and how to not necessarily not support the bad comics, but basically say like, this is the direction we want to see comic books going. And I've got a fantastic group of people who I could not do the show without. Like, genuinely, my editor Xander is my saving grace in the universe, and the 8 other people that are like the regular rotating guests on our show, like, again, I couldn't do it without them. I don't think I could sit in front of a microphone constantly. Like, Eric, I commend you for what you do. I know a lot of yours is a lot of talking, and it's amazing. I don't think I could do that. So like, the podcast is just like a way for me to catch up with my friends, experience new things, and try to like broaden my horizons when it comes to comics.
Nice. The floor is yours, Eric.
Well, Mike, thanks for that. I appreciate that compliment. But like you just said, the podcasting is kind of a way to catch up with your friends, and that kind of goes back to why I started mine. Similar to what Mike did, I started a blog to talk about comics, which was just another extension of the conversations I was having with the people at the local comic shop that I would go to.
Right.
And so I wanted to have that connection with, the unknowns out there on the internet, right?
The most dangerous thing in the world.
yeah, exactly. Because I thought, well, I wanted to. I had certain viewpoints about the books that I wanted to get out, or I just wanted to explore the ideas that I was having about the stuff I was reading. And so I thought I would put this stuff out there on a website and see if I got any kind of reaction. My hope was, of course, that I would get people commenting and starting a dialogue that way, again, to duplicate that which I was experiencing at the comic shops. And then about a year later is when I started the podcast, and I did that for, I guess, a couple different reasons. One, I thought it'd be much easier to sit behind a microphone and just ramble for an hour instead of hours at the keyboard typing away. Because my profession is I'm an editor at a company that I work for here locally, and if you let me, I'll revise until I'm dead, and I didn't want to do that necessarily. And I was also, this is about 2006, where I kind of discovered what podcasts were. I kept hearing the term in things I was reading, and I thought, once I discovered what these things were, what podcasts were, I thought, well, there must be somebody out there doing comic book based podcasts, right? And that led me to discover Comic Geek Speak, and so I listened to them for a few years. And as I was doing that, as I was doing that, I was also still writing about the books I was reading. And so I thought I would, if they can do that, and like I said, it seems easier to get behind a microphone and chat. Let's try that, and that's why I started the Long Box Review podcast.
Nice, guys. We're live on GetVocal.com. We're here with Eric from Long Box Review podcast, Mike Rapin from the I Read Comic Books podcast. Please join the conversation. If you have any questions, get on the chat here. Type it in, or even grab this spot. Join us face to face. We're open books. Like we'll answer anything, I think.
Oh yeah, why not?
I'm not hiding anything. Are you guys hiding? I'm not hiding
anything. I don't think.
Just what's behind the screen.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. So guys, when you're, it looks like Daniel's coming in. Daniel, how are you?
Hey guys.
I know this guy.
How's it going?
Welcome to the show.
Yeah, I'm here because Mike said he was going to be on the podcast or on the.
Nice. Thank you for joining us. Any questions?
No, I mean, I think I really enjoyed listening to everybody's stories. I think the main thing I want to know, what kind of keeps you going to like keep going back to comic books and just like try to get people involved? Like, what's behind that drive?
Well, for me, it's kind of something that Mike said earlier too. There's so much new material that's constantly being published all the time, so it's just a matter of discovery, trying to figure out, is this a good book? Why is this a good book? This is not. I don't really like this one. Why don't I like that? And just having a discussion with my audience sometimes, and usually that discussion is over Twitter. But I get emails, I get comments on the blog as well. So it's just like I said, a journey of discovery for me, and also just because I love reading all this stuff, I want to keep going.
Yeah, I ditto the same thing. I mean, Danny, you know this, but I mean, I need my X-Men comics. That's my like monthly fix that I need. I don't know what it is, but I keep reading X-Men comics, whether they're good or whether they're bad. I just keep coming back to them. They are my daily soap operas, if you must. But no, I think I'm a very easy person to get a lot of momentum. I guess I'm very momentous. I don't know how you describe this. I have a lot of potential for momentum in that I just read one really good thing, or even one small mediocre thing that's just a little bit better than nothing. I just get really hyped up about it. Like I will, if I get into a comic and a single issue of that book is good, it'll keep me going for the rest of the night to keep reading comics. I mean, you get sometimes like really heavy books. Like I love the Ed Pisker's Grand Design that he's doing right now. An amazing comic book. But like, if I read that book, it's amazing, but it takes like all the energy out of me, and I have to like sleep for a day, get my energy back, and then dive into 20 more comics the next day. But it's I don't know. The comic books are like the easiest medium for me to pick up and to relate to and feel like this is a very much a thing that is mine. Like I know there are thousands of people out there reading comics, but when I'm sitting at home and I've got the paper right in front of me or the graphic novel sitting on my lap, it feels like the most personal experience I can get compared to watching TV or watching a movie, going to a theater, going out to an actual play or something like that. There is no experience beyond it, and comic books I will always come back to them for that reason.
Daniel, thanks so much for joining us and asking that question, but I'm going to have to kick you out now. You get out of here.
Thanks, Danny. You're the best, man.
Thank you. You please stay and watch the show, but just get out
See
of
you
here.
guys. Bye.
Thanks, Daniel. So, guys, it sounds like you're doing this to sort of scratch an itch that, like, it sounds like if you didn't have a podcast, you would still be doing something with comics, regardless of podcast or anything, or you would have a blog, you would have a website. So it's more like scratching an itch as far as I'm concerned. That's what it sounds like. But would you be doing the podcast? Let's say you weren't as successful as you wanted to be and you had like one listener. Would you still be doing it week to week?
Yes.
I mean, no one knows how many people listen to any podcast. All right, let's be honest.
Exactly. It's true. It's true.
I say that sarcastically, but I mean, honestly, like the podcast start, Eric, maybe you probably can relate to this. You just kind of do the thing and put it out there for the world. And you just, fingers crossed, maybe one other person will find it interesting. I know for me, like my big thing was I was already having these conversations. Eric, it sounds like you had a similar experience. I was having these conversations at the bar, like with people, or I would, they would come over and hang out at my house. We'd read some comics and then talk about them. Like the only difference really is that we put a microphone in front of our faces. Now, I mean, there is a bit of a more of elaborate setup like we've got right here. But I mean, honestly, the real difference between the conversation is just like we have a microphone and it's a little bit more organized. But the conversations that are actually happening on the show feel organic. Like after you get out of that kind of like, hey, we're doing a show kind of weird vibe, you get into this very nice groove of we're just having a conversation here. There just happens to be a microphone, and I wouldn't trade that for the world. Like it is, I have some of the most profound conversations with people just on my podcast, and then I get to go and talk to other people about it afterwards, and I'm like, oh man, that's enough energy to bring me back. I want to do another show about this little bit of that topic. Yeah, I think I'd still be doing it to wrap that all up.
Amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah,
how about you, Eric?
I've had similar experiences to what Mike is describing when I have guests on the show. Normally, my format is it's just me talking in the microphone about certain books, right? But on occasion, I bring in guests, sometimes even listeners who have contacted me, and I've brought them on, and it's just. I keep saying this, but it's discovering these new and interesting people through the lens of the books that we're talking about, the characters that we love, and just having that kind of common experience, and then going from there and seeing where that conversation leads us. So exactly. It's very rewarding to do that. And even if I'm not directly talking to someone as I'm talking with you two, I as I sit at my mic recording an episode with just me, I am thinking about you, you, the audience, you, the listener, and I'm talking to you. And, that's, so even though I'm not getting a response back directly like that, that's how I guess I structure the show, so that helps keep me engaged, because I feel like I'm having a conversation, even though it's really just one-sided.
Mm-hmm. So guys, you guys have been doing this for years, and you have several podcasts under your belt. What kind of goals do you have for yourself right now for your show? What are you, where you want the show to be right now, or do you want? How can you improve, and like where do you see the show going?
Eric, I'll let you start. Go ahead.
Sure, give me all the hard questions.
Exactly.
Well, I'm never satisfied with what I'm doing. I'm always wanting to improve it, to do something different. In fact, right now, I've been on a bit of extended leave from the podcast, partly because my family and I went on vacation here in the last month, but also every once in a while.
Sorry, where'd you guys go?
Well, my wife and I went to Edinburgh, Scotland, for a week.
Nice.
And my larger family and I just got back from the Oregon coast.
There you go.
Very nice. Yeah, really good trip.
Take advantage of it. Yeah, perfect. Sorry. Okay, continue. Sorry, I'm just nosy. I'm sorry.
That's fine. That's fine. So I sometimes need to just take some time off just to kind of recharge.
Yeah, sure.
Recharge the old batteries, as they say. And during that time, I start thinking about, well, what is it I want to do, and what kind of different things that I want to try. I've done the usual, like I've done a previews episode that I do with George from the Meanwhile at the podcast. We get together once a month and do that. Well, other podcasts do that, right? I do a news show with one of my childhood friends, Travis. Oddfellows Thoughts. He has a show on YouTube, and those are great. I love interacting with them, but it's like, well, other people do shows like that. People get together and talk about the weekly books they've read, and because I don't get my comics weekly, based on the shipments that I get and how much I can spend, I get them twice a month. So I don't do that. So what else do I, what are some other things that I can do that are not the usual things? So I'm always thinking about that kind of stuff.
How about you, Mike?
Sorry, I got lost in Eric's discussion. What was the question again?
just goals for your podcast.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
Like,
so go ahead. No,
I was just gonna say, like, I'm sure there's been a natural evolution to your show, and a lot of things just start changing and they feel better, and you start progressing.
Oh yeah.
But are you happy with where you're at, and where do you want to see your podcast go?
Yeah. So it's been quite a journey. I mean, the show itself has evolved in multiple different ways. I mean, when we first started, it was just me and two of my friends, and my buddy Xander and I. We would try to like brainstorm ideas of how to make it better every single week. And we have to do less and less of that now, because we've got ourselves in like a very good format that we really like. It's a length that we like. We get positive feedback from the people that listen to it about how they like how we've changed things. But I'm always thinking of new stuff. I'm always trying to think, well, what if we added a new thing? Our Patreon has been like an amazing place for us to say, hey, let's try something for like 6 weeks and see how we feel about it. Maybe we'll do more in the future. And that's kind of content that we just roll out for our Patreon folks to say, hey, check this out. Let us know what you think of it. On top of that, it's like, I am always trying to like hone our show so that my dream goal would be in like next year, whatever. I don't care, whenever, but like sometime in the future to be doing a live episode at a major convention. It doesn't have to be SDCC. That seems like too much, even if it would be great because it's the biggest, con in the US, but some major convention, to do a live show, to go and meet up with a bunch of fans, and to know that, like, get that affirmation. Like, yes, there's more than just the half dozen people that I interact with online regularly that are into the show. And not that I dislike that. I mean, I just want to know everybody. I want to know what everybody thinks about it. So my dream would be that eventually I can pay people for being on the show, pay for all the stuff, like basically break even on the show. That's my goal personally. And then like put money in the pockets of the people that come onto my show, and they spend a lot of their time to basically make our show as good as it is. Like, I think if we had lost anybody, the show would be worse off because of that. I would hate to see anybody go, but like I really want to basically pay everyone back for their time over the last 4 years. That's kind of like the dream. Also to do this big convention thing. That's the icing on the cake, I think.
I've had a similar thought too, Mike. It would be really cool to do such a thing. Yeah. That would be awesome. Yeah, and you always, anybody who does a show like this, you want to grow your audience, and you want to interact more with them. So it's always trying to find different ways of doing that. That's one possibility. Like I was saying before, trying different formats or different approaches. That's why I started doing a segment or one offshoot of the show where I just talk about stuff that goes on. Like, for example, the next episode I record will be me talking about my vacations. And I found, I just started doing that just because I thought it'd be kind of fun to ramble on for 5 minutes about what I was doing that week. And then I discovered that my listeners really like that. And so I started doing more of it.
That's cool.
And so, it's just that process of discovery again. I'll try not to say that word again, but
we're going to discover ourselves. This is
a theme,
podcast. Yeah. We're going to find ourselves in this show.
Yeah.
Guys, we're live on getvocal.com behind the podcast. Thank you so much for watching. Join us in the chat room. If you have any questions, write it in, grab a spot. Guys, let's start talking about the actual comics now. All right. We did the pre stuff. Let's get really into it. What makes a good comic book, and what, like, for you to invest so much time, right? What do you look for? I mean, obviously it can be preference. It doesn't have to be generic. Like, what do you personally look for in a series?
Oh,
Mike, you
man.
can start.
All right, I'll
Mike,
start.
you
This
go
is
ahead.
I mean, I already said I love the X-Men, right? Like
Yeah.
straightforward, I'm just gonna read X-Men books. I probably don't know every single thing there is to know about X-Men comics, but I don't think that you necessarily need to be that person in order to enjoy the comics. Like X-Men comics will always be good for me because my whole mindset about what the X-Men are will always make an X-Men comic great. But as for like, say, I'm looking for a fresh book that's on the shelf, like a new #1 comes out from some publisher, or an old graphic novel comes out, or I see a volume of a manga that I've never heard of before. Usually what makes those comics work for me is a good, like, this is the most generic thing, but a good hook that doesn't feel forced. Like every single #1 comic that you're ever going to read forever now is going to have this cliffhanger ending that you're going to go, oh, but what if? And then you have to read issue 2. But it's the comics that when you get to the last page and it ends and you go, no, wait, that can't possibly be the end. Those are the books that always get me. Those are the manga volumes that always get me. The original, or the, the long form stuff. As far as like original graphic novels, like a one and done kind of series, usually for me, it's books that break my heart or I feel like I've learned something from them.
You like a good cry.
I genuinely do. Like, I genuinely enjoy books that hurt a lot to read because it's like a cathartic way to get through some of those feelings. And like this book I'm going to plug, Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me. It is by far the best comic you can read in 2019 as far as I'm concerned. That book I've read 3 times since it came out like a month and a half ago. It's that good because the characters are so well done. The story itself is very like almost cliche, but like it's very beautiful. The art is fantastic. It's like this combination of everything that makes a good comic book in general in a graphic novel form. And that's usually what hooks me for original graphic novels. I mean, I go on for days. So Eric, let's hear from you, and then I'll jump in when I come up with more stuff.
Well, for me, having been reading comics for so long, I've seen things come and go. I've seen them recycled so many times. I mean, how many crises do we need, for example? So, why do I keep reading these things? There's a few factors. One is I'm always looking for a good story, and that's depending on how you define that, right? For me, it's one thing. For you guys, it's probably something different.
So what does that mean for you? A good story.
Well, it depends. It depends on the genre. It depends on who the characters are. Okay. What I've done here in later years is I tend to instead of reading Teen Titans all the time, because Teen Titans is my X-Men to Mike's point there. What I started doing is following creators that I like, writers, artists, and no matter what they do, I for whatever reason, I respond to their work. Yeah. And I'm thinking of like Ed Brubaker and Brian K. Vaughan as a couple writers, right? Yeah. Those guys, I will read whatever they write, whatever they produce, just because I know that they tell a good story. Mm-hmm. And I wish I could tell you why I think those are good stories. I guess I have to really think about that now, but
because you really love crime stories. That's what you're telling me with Ed Brubaker.
Well, see, that's just it with Brubaker. It's not even that. I'm not particularly a crime fiction fan, but he tells really engaging stories about people who happen to be caught up in these situations that are less than favorable, mostly for the most part for them, right? Yeah. But it's really about the storytelling, and I'm not just talking about the words on the page. I think too many of us bloggers and podcasters tend to focus more on the writers, and even though I've mentioned 2 writers, comics are a mashup medium, right? It's the words on the page. It's the pencils. It's the inks. It's the colors. It's the pacing. It's the page layout. It's all this stuff. And Mike said this earlier. Comics do nothing or do something that no other entertainment form can do. Movies, TV, that's kind of the same thing, and that's kind of dumbing it down a lot. But comics do so much more than those mediums do, and that's where I get excited about it, is discovering how these stories are told, and what kind of emotional response do they elicit from me? That's what I'm looking for too.
So we're talking about the best of the best and what gets you guys reading and nonstop reading. But what about the ones that are just so bad? Like, have you ever covered that on your podcast? Do you ever review books that are just that you just don't understand how someone made it, published it, or can we talk about those?
Well, do you want to go, Mike?
One. It's tough. It's really tough because I think a lot of the times it's really easy to rag on a comic. I'll just say that. Let's start with that. It's really easy to be like, oh, that was dumb. That was ugly. I don't like that art. I didn't like the way that was written. You don't have to give any reason. You can just be venomous and angry. Just say it was bad. It's all subjective, right? I will say on I read comic books, for the most part, we try to take a positive spin. If you didn't like a book, just don't talk about it. It's fine.
Okay.
And that doesn't mean that books we don't talk about are books we don't like all the time, but like I'd rather leave that area gray. But I will say we have brought up books that were not good for specific reasons, right? We've talked about comics in like inherent sexism. We have a whole episode about the male gaze in comic books, and we bring up some examples of like how a book like for instance, like a Watchmen, right? Watchmen, everyone loves it. Everyone thinks it's the most perfect comic book out there, but it does have some problems, and we can talk about that. And that doesn't mean that Watchmen is bad, right? But that's you can criticize it. I guess we try to take a focus the direction of criticism, constructive criticism, without necessarily like pointing blame at the comic or the creator or the artist or whatever, because you can't say this one thing defines a person. And I don't think it's fair to do that. And then it gets really personal and it can get really blamey. So on the whole, we try not to do that. But when we do talk about comic books that are bad, usually it's a laugh. Usually there are comics you can point to and go, it's just not good, and we can all laugh about it. I guess that's pretty much the take that we have on our show.
Yeah, and I'm similar. I tend to focus on the positive, promote the things that I think are good, and I just basically ignore the stuff that I don't like, even though I'm very tempted at getting on the mic and going on a tirade about why I hate this book, but which I will not do. But I am interested, though, if I'm having a conversation with someone to discover, well, what is it about this book that you liked that I'm not seeing? And I often make a call to my listeners, as I'm talking about something where I am critiquing. And I'm trying to look at it, from an objective point of view. This is why this doesn't work. As opposed to just an emotional one, which is this just sucks, and try to figure out, well, what is it about me that I'm not responding in the same way to this story that a listener who liked it did.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is always a great way to think, because it's like you said, Mike, it's really easy just to rip something apart about anything, comic books aside. You can just be an asshole about everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But I like the way you guys approach it. I mean, but if there was one, maybe like a character arc, I'm really digging in here. If there's a character, like an arc that like you were just so disappointed in, you know what I mean? Like for maybe a character that you love and you're just like, really, why would you do that? Does one stand out right now? Like,
I read X-Men, so like it's a lot of bad.
Is it a lot of bad?
Don't get me wrong. I know that the X-Men aren't perfect. I mean, I am one of the few people out there who's not a fan of Jean Grey as Phoenix, and so I have a lot of just things I don't like about that storyline. I feel like I'm breaking some people's hearts by saying that, but it's just not a thing that hooks me. Very recently, there's been a whole thing with the Jean Grey stuff, and I had to basically staple my mouth shut to not talk about it because I just did not like it. But again, that's my personal opinion about that. And it's just like, we're hearing it now, whatever, but like, I just don't think it's a good story to keep telling over and over and over. And yes, I get it. She's a Phoenix. We all got it. But still, I can't get it. It gets under my skin and it bothers me and it gets me venomous. It's like I want to jump on the microphone and just start screaming about it. But is that actually a good critique? Is that actually a good discussion for people? If you want to hear me rant, I'm more than happy to, but that doesn't make me feel good at the end of the day. Like, I'd rather, like Eric said, lift something up than kind of put something down, because there's a lot of negativity about that in general on the internet. And blah 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 philosophy
You know,
about the
you know
internet
what you
stuff.
should do? You should put it on your Patreon. That if people give a little bit more, they get a rant
Oh
from
yeah,
you.
oh yeah.
I'd buy that. Are you kidding me? I'd love to hear that. I don't even know enough about it, but I'd love to hear you
Sure,
rant about it. Yeah.
sure.
How about you, Eric? A disappointing character arc that comes to mind?
Well, when you started asking that question, a particular thing did leap to the front of my brain, and I'll say two words: Rick Grayson.
I wish I understood.
Please, Eric, explain.
So this is in reference to the Nightwing comic and recent events in there, and the reason it's so disturbing to me is that Dick Grayson is my favorite comic book superhero character. Okay. And when they decided to shoot him in the head and give him basically amnesia for however long this lasts, and I'll come back to that, but and he's turned into this other person called Rick Grayson, R-I-C, Rick. I just had to walk away. I you know, as I said before, especially superhero comics are very cyclical, and if you don't like something right now, either with Dick Grayson or the X-Men, you can always come back to it later, right? Because there's eventually someone else is going to take over the creative reins of that book for that character or those characters, and you may discover, hey, this is a great take on it. But right now, Rick Grayson is not for me, even though it pains me to say that because I love that character so much.
Right. One day you'll go back and you'll like hate read it just to say what did I
miss?
Get it over with. Just to get it over with. I get that. I've been there.
I've done that too.
Yeah,
I've done that too. Yeah.
I hate. So guys, hard copies versus digital. What are your takes on that? And I mean, obviously everything's digital right now.
Right.
But are you still buying the physical copies? How do you feel about that?
Well, I can say, so I worked at Comixology for 4 years. They are like the place to buy digital comic books for the most part. I know that a lot of other places do sell digital comic books. For the most part, if you want to get a digital comic, Comixology probably has it with a rare exception. For instance, there's like some drawn in quarterly books, a smaller publisher, Fantagraphics books that don't get put up there. But all your major publishers, your Marvel, your DC, your Image, Dark Horse, Boom, Valiant, all the big players in comic books, they're there. So I was I moved in, and then I also moved to New York for the job. So in doing that, I had to basically take my 10 long boxes of comics, 12 long boxes of comics, and somehow cut it down to a manageable size, which I decided was 12 short boxes. It maths out to be about a little over a third of my original comic book set. And then I also had to get rid of a ton of graphic novels. But that being said, I do still buy physical books. Like I have a pull list at Midtown Comics because it's right down the street from where I work now. And I get about maybe 10 or 12 books a month. And then everything else is digital for me. So I'm like one of the rare exceptions of people who are buying mostly digital and with some physical books.
Yeah. And Eric?
Yeah, so when I started reading, there was no such thing as digital, and so I think the stuff you kind of grow up doing, you kind of keep on to. I don't really like buying songs digitally. I like to own the CD. I'm that old, and comics are the same way. But I will say, while I don't subscribe to any comics digitally, I have often, usually during sales at Comixology, I'll take advantage of those to be able to read material that I could not afford to buy in printed form at the time, and so then I can read it. And the recent launch of the DC Universe app from DC Comics has afforded me the ability to read a lot of old DC Comics for really cheap. In fact, when I was on my vacations, as we were traveling to and from, that's what I did. I opened up my iPad and I launched that app, and I read probably a good 5 or 6 limited series that I wanted to read that like I said, I couldn't buy before for whatever reason. So digital comics has been great in that regard for me. I don't know that I could pull the trigger on subscribing to digital comics. Mostly, I think because if that service went away, and Comixology appears to be here to stay, and that's great. But if it did go away, where are my comics then? Right? So
yeah, what just happened?
I understand. I totally understand.
I'm just not as trustworthy of the technology, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, what about the notion of like comic books being collectibles? Do you guys subscribe to that, or are you more just into they're books, you're reading them, or are you into like the face value of it, keeping it in mint condition and all that? Because I feel like that was a bit of an older theory.
Yeah, I've been buying comics like physically for about as long as I've been reading them. Like I basically found a comic book shop and just started buying a ton regularly. And excuse me, at first I was like, I got to keep these all in pristine condition. And I don't know why. Like I just thought you get a comic, you got to bag and board it and put it in a long box and seal it up and make sure that it can never get wet. And nowadays, like I still do that. I still bag and board all my comics, but I don't care about them nearly as much as I did maybe a decade ago. With rare exception, like I did get like a specific variant cover set for a run of all the number ones of an X-Men launch that like ended in 2 years. I do collect like some books, and I'm like, this one I actually kind of want to set aside. It's a nice limited series that I think is important, but otherwise, like, your random like 56 of a series, it's just like, okay, whatever. I'll probably be able to find another copy of that if need to. Or like Eric was talking about, you just get a digital copy of it if you ever want to read it again. It's like it's the rare exception of like a really nice number one or a special cover that you that's being printed only a certain number of times, or maybe you get like a sketch cover of a certain issue. You go to a convention with a blank cover and you get it actually drawn on. That's the kind of stuff you want to keep and take care of. But otherwise, it's all pretty recyclable. It's like you said, it's like a book. Like you probably can find another copy somewhere or digitally.
Yeah, comics have always been. I mean, from the very beginning, back in the mid to late 30s, they were always a disposable entertainment.
Yeah.
Right? They were never meant to be meant to have survived. And what does Action Comics go for? Some millions of dollars now.
Yeah.
Right. It was never intended to be that. Right. So I don't subscribe to that. I like Mike said. With certain exceptions. It's just they're entertainment material to me. They mean something to me, and so I don't put a lot of value on it. Although I will say I have, in recent years, I've invested a little bit in some key books, but I also don't spend a lot on them either. Yeah. So because I know they're just, I only want them because I want them, and I don't want them because I want to turn around and sell them. That's not the point. It's the experience of the book.
You mean you're not
reading
turning around
it and loving
like,
it?
You're not getting them all like CGC graded so that you can like
put them
inside of a block of plastic and put it up on your wall.
No slabbing here in my house.
Okay, good. Thought I was going to insult you there for a second. Okay.
Guys, we're live on getvocal.com. You're watching Behind the Podcast. We're also live on Facebook, Periscope, YouTube. But join us here on getvocal.com. Join the chat. The chat room's going. It seems pretty active. But if anyone wants to ask a question, grab a spot face-to-face with these podcasters. We're talking comic books. Join us. Ask anything. We're open books. We're not here to hide anything. I want to talk to you guys about comic books as a vehicle for maybe I feel like it's a bit of ahead of the curve when it comes to other entertainment in terms of socially and politically correctness. I mean, with gender roles and race and religion. Can you guys speak to that? Because I know like there's been a lot of history in these comics, and then you look at when Marvel or DC release a movie, and there's always like issues if Spider-Man, Donald Glover was going to play Spider-Man at one point, or he wanted to, and people were just like, oh, no way. Like, but there is an African American Spider-Man, correct?
Yeah, I mean, Miles Morales. Yeah.
So let's talk about that and how I feel like comics are a bit of ahead of the curve here.
I think they always have been. I mean, if you look at Superman in Action Comics #1, you're talking about a person who was taking the law into his own hands to right some social injustices. and just go from there, right? Stan Lee with Spider-Man and the drug issues and
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's the long list of things that we could probably talk about in terms of how comics are progressive in that way. Yeah, I agree with you, Ademo. It's they are ahead of the curve. But I also think, just generally speaking, I'm gonna overgeneralize. So just
Sure.
so people
I'm
understand
ready.
this,
Yeah.
I think that creative folks tend to be a little more progressive in their politics, in their viewpoints, and then that gets turned into their art. And that's the stuff that we then absorb.
Yeah, I think Eric, I completely agree with you there. I think that's, with rare exception, I think that there is like that whole art side of the world in general, like culture in general, when in the arts world is typically more progressive. And I think comic books are an interesting medium for that, because they are so they're so quickly created. Like the turnaround is a month ish.
Yeah.
For most books. So there's a lot more room for experimentation. There's a lot more room for people that want to try to say, let's show some representation. We've got this book, let's just do it. Who cares? There's not like an entire franchise weighing on our back. That's why you see a lot of this outside. I mean, the Big Two has been doing a lot of like push for representation of people of like various minority groups and all sorts of stuff, and that's great. But you see it even more in indie books, like more people who are trying to write books that represent themselves. They realize, hey, I don't have to necessarily write just like some straight white guy in order for my book to work. Instead, I can just tell a book about me and my life in some fiction, and it'll actually sell, and it'll sell really well. Like there are countless books that I've seen backed on Kickstarter for thousands and thousands of dollars that I've supported as well, like that are books about people who you probably aren't going to see represented in Big Two comics. And that's not me trying to like take a stab at the Big Two, but I am talking just in general. Like these types of comics are super prevalent, and they're only becoming more and more popular because people want to see themselves represented in comics, no matter who they are. And there's enough for everybody. I don't care who you are.
Yeah.
There's enough for everybody. And it's again, comics is the greatest medium. Fastest turnaround. This is the type of stuff that it's easy to distribute, easy to get in people's hands, and you can tell a story in a way that will connect you better than say a prose novel or a movie, because it's your personal experience of reading. This is a whole sum up of everything that I've been saying tonight, but comics offers that in a way unlike any other medium because of the way that they're created in general.
Yeah.
So they can be, because it's just like creating a zine. It's just like doing anything on your own. You can say, fuck it, I'm just going to make this thing. Sorry, swear words.
Watch your language. Oh my God.
and it doesn't matter who reads it. It's just like making a podcast. If we're going to connect everything full circle twice, like you're just going to make this thing, put it out there, and hopefully people will enjoy it. And even if only a dozen people do, that is success, because it got out of your system and out onto paper so people can, read it, or digital, because there's a lot of digital comic books that do this really well too.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned movies and the TV shows. Do you feel like that those being released, do they help the comic book sales? Do they help that culture grow? Or is it kind of like shooting itself in the foot because they don't really execute that well? Coming to mind, like obviously the DC versus Marvel movies, Marvel is obviously kicking ass right now,
Sure.
and DC kind of drops the ball once in a while.
DC, I will say, has incredible animated films. Their animated feature films are miles beyond anything Marvel's even tried to make.
So then why the drop off with live action?
This is the constant conversation on the internet. No one knows except for like 4 executives at Time Warner and 4 executives at Marvel. They are the people that are controlling all. I'm being insane about this, but no one knows. I genuinely wish we could get some answers about this. Eric, I saw you nodding a lot. I assume you agree with me about this.
Yes, I do.
Hey, we had a viewer here, Joseph. How are you?
What's up, man? How are you doing? So you're tackling the question about what the heck is Warner Brothers doing, as opposed to like Kevin Feige and his crew. And I think that Warner Brothers is more. We actually talked about this on this past week's episode of Pop Xcast, and you look at the mind of Kevin Feige. The guy has a plan and trajectory that was in place 12, 13 years ago. And then you look at Warner Brothers, and you know, of course, they got 1989, Michael Keaton, Tim Burton Batman, which kind of catapulted off the stems of Frank Miller from 1986 and the Dark Knight saga and all of that. But there's no cinematic plan of effectiveness that was planned out of a trajectory over time. And I think that's why they were rushing into like Justice League. Yeah, Wonder Woman's a great movie. Aquaman's a fantastic movie. Love Shazam. But there's no like, you know what I mean? There's not like a consistency
It's not
that.
consistent.
And if there was a Kevin Feige over at Warner Brothers, I think that right now we would be rallying behind DC. But sadly, DC, their big heavy hitters is obviously the DC Online universe, which is Swamp Thing, and some of those things are doing Teen Titans and all of that. But also, you know, they've got like the CW Flash series, and then they got Arrow. You know, you may knock it, but really that's what they got.
No,
they
no,
don't have anything else.
I laughed because I thought you were going to list all 6 TV shows that they have.
Not gonna do that. Not gonna do that.
It's insane. They've basically taken over the entire CW lineup at night. And it blows my mind that the CW is okay with that, but people are watching. People are into that, and I'm good for them. Like I watched a lot of Arrow, I watched a lot of Flash, and then I tried to get into DC's Legends of Tomorrow, and I watched like 2 seasons of Supergirl, and there are more shows than what I'm talking about here. It's
Yes.
a lot of TV to take in.
It's a lot. I use the word saturation. There's a lot of saturation on the television market, whereas there's literally nothing in cinematic.
Out of curiosity, how do we feel about Arrow, the TV show?
Eric, I'll let you jump in. Eric, you please jump in.
I've never been a big fan of the tone, the approach of the CW shows in general. Although I tend to like Supergirl a little bit more, but Arrow I could just never get into. But I know it's hugely popular.
Yeah.
I like Flash
I couldn't get into it either. Flash is better.
I like Flash better. Honestly.
Yeah, I enjoyed the first 4-5 seasons of Arrow. And I was also watching Flash when they started doing the crossover stuff. I basically was continuing to watch all of those DC shows just to get to the crossover episodes. Like, and I also, Eric, I really enjoyed Supergirl, but at that point I was saturated, as Joseph said, with all of this TV that I just dropped them all cold turkey. I just couldn't, I couldn't put up with it. It's just way too much television.
You're better off to stop the CW stuff and just go straight and watch The Boys on Amazon Prime. You'll be totally done.
I've heard good things about that.
I've heard you're really good, dude. You need to do it. But hey, I'm not going to spend too much of your time, guys. But I just want to hop in.
Thanks, Joe. I was about to kick you out anyway, Joseph.
How dare you?
You get out.
Nice.
Guys, thanks. So Guardians of the Galaxy was sort of obscure. I mean, to majority of the public. I mean, if you're not a comic book person, you weren't really aware of what that was. And now it's huge. It's a huge hit.
Right.
They're making a third one, right? Part of the Avengers and everything like that. But what kind of series can we expect, or what would you want to see similar to that gets its own movie?
I mean, we're getting the Eternals.
I was gonna say, yeah,
we're getting the Eternals. You want to talk about obscure, weird stuff? That is
I don't even know. Very
obscure, weird stuff, and they're making it, I think, a linchpin of the next phase of Marvel movies. That's my guess. That it's going to be a linchpin of like all of the big announcements and all the big stuff that ties in. I mean, yeah, you really can't get weirder than that.
And what is that? Break that down for me, because I have no idea what that is.
Oh boy,
That's
it's Jack Kirby.
It's Jack Kirby, yeah.
Jack Kirby, Marvel Cosmic ish kind of stuff. That's just, I don't know. I don't know how else to describe it. It's Jack Kirby like doing weird stuff.
I mean, it's. I think
it's going to be a hit. Do you think it'll be good?
I think with the cast,
that's a good question.
Yeah, they have a killer cast. I mean, it's going to be. I mean, I don't know enough about it. I haven't read any of the comics or anything, but from my understanding is there are these great beings called Celestials, and they created these people called the Eternals on Earth millions and millions of years ago. They have super duper powers, allows them to fly, shoot laser beams out of their eyes, and so they have been flying all over the galaxy. Sounds really cool to me. I'm wondering what's going to be the villain, what's going to be the turn, and that has my interest peaked enough, especially, again, with the cast that they've got coming in. I don't remember, but I know Kumail Nanjiani, I think is his name, is going to be in it, and that's like enough to get me into the movie. And
that guy's great.
Yeah, he's fantastic. And so it's going to either be given what they did with Doctor Strange, the way that they're going with Doctor Strange, with the madness of the multiverse of madness in the multiverse, multiverse of madness, that's what it's called. And the stuff that we kind of saw in the Doctor Strange movie, like there was some trippy stuff. If they lean into that movie's going to be crazy, super cool. And especially with what we saw with Spider-Man Far From Home and what we saw with Spider-Verse, like these movie studios are not scared of doing zany, crazy stuff in your face, if only for a moment. That's all that Eternals really needs to kind of be a success. And then from there, they can just kind of throw in some funny, like they did with Guardians of the Galaxy, because Guardians of the Galaxy also did some of that in the sequel.
Yeah.
Anyways, I'm ranting. Eric, what are your thoughts?
Actually, guys, I'm sorry. I got to cut off here. We're almost done.
Yeah.
Quick 2 speed rounds, like a quick fire off these questions. If Comic-Con, if you had one more year of Comic-Con, okay, and you're going, what are you dressing as? One more year. It's just, that's it. And then no more. What are you going as to Comic-Con? What are you going to dress as?
Well, I got to go as Nightwing. So
Nightwing.
easy choice there for me.
See, I love Gambit.
X-Men?
I love Gambit, X-Men character. But if I had like some funds, I would do a full-blown Doctor Doom. Have to.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah. How much money are you going to sink into that? What are you prepared to spend?
I'm probably willing to spend like under $1,000, near $1,000 for that to make it full-fledged.
I like that a lot.
Guys,
thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. Mike Rapin from I Read Comic Books podcast and Eric from the Long Box Review podcast. A lot of fun meeting you. Great to know, getting to know you. Wish you all the success, and hopefully we can have you back on sometime soon.
I'd love it.
Thank
That'd
you.
be awesome.
All right, guys. Have a great night. Thank you so much for watching Behind the Podcast. Next week, we're going to be talking about romance novels. So get your 50 Shades of Grey ready. Get your whips out. I haven't read it yet. I'll catch up, though. And we'll talk about it next week, guys. Same time, same place. Thank you so much. We'll see you then.
Bye.
Thanks.